right, we're going to start here. We're just waiting for the last person to sit down. Those teachers. Hello, my name is Jason Becker. One of the co-chairmen tonight. Some of you know the board of all these meetings, but make sure you introduce yourself, put your name tags on, complete your information sheet. Part of this meeting will be more about the faces. This is the facilitating team. Besides us, the members back there, and a few of them over here that are probably in the hockey game. The students, we have one more meeting, which will be June 6th. After this one, so we can try to wrap all this up. So the agenda for that will be, after we get done with the ball and the data information, we'll do a small group work activity, dialogue. I don't know if we're going to do the reporting and closing session. We will have time tonight for some questions with the three illegals up here. The session documentation, which will be the data information, the work activity. The verbatim responses will be on the website again afterwards. And then we'll have the executive summary and the decision we can give to the school board. Questions or comments? If you have any questions during the time out when you're working on this, raise your hand. We can have somebody come around and answer them. That's just the time we'll have time to ask some questions before we get into the work. A recap session number 3. Potential improvements. You should have a worksheet on showing what the verbatim and everything we looked at. The most important things were the list is going down, and then also the potential improvements prioritized by curriculum. So that's about what we did on that one. All right, we're going to do options for funding tonight. We're going to have Brian Lester, Mr. Thomas Crabtree, and Bob Miller are do some speaking and talking to you, and then we'll give some question times afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. So I'm Brian Lester, and basically what happened here is community engagement 1, 2, and 3. Sue presented this portion of tonight's topic, and given that, is that better? Okay. Given that tonight is finance, she asked me to cover. Anyway, the importance of tonight, I think, just before we jump into the actual slides, is the first 3 meetings that we've had, we've really spent a lot of time talking about challenges that we face, some strengths that the district has, and we've talked quite a bit about prioritization, whether that relates to curriculum, whether it relates to school finance, whether it relates to facilities. Tonight is a really important meeting in terms of gathering your input into priorities on how we might fund any of those things that essentially rise to the top of the priority list. And in order to have a better understanding of how to answer that question, we want to give you a little bit of a deep dive into the current state of district finances. And I'm going, okay, the proper way. So everybody here got the tax bill probably this last week like I did. One thing that you'll notice on that is as you look at the line item for Smithton School, and this is the same with every school in the state, you see a single line item that says Smithton, Community Consolidated number 130. But the reality is that single number is an aggregation of 9 different funds that make up school finance. And these are all kind of the legal structure for how schools are financed in the state of Illinois. This right here is what those 9 buckets are. Eight buckets, 4, 7, 8, 9 buckets that make up that one single line item on your tax bill. So just real quick, I'll touch what each of these are, and then we'll talk about some of the content on the slide itself. By far, the single biggest percentage of the number that is showing up on that single line item on your tax bill is the education fund, represented by this first big bucket on the left. It's called Fund 10. These are just numbered Fund 10, Fund 20, Fund 30. This is where all of the direct costs related to curriculum, staff, salaries, benefits, any dollars essentially going towards curriculum, all of those things reside under the education fund. The next fund that you see there, and I should also note, well, I'll come back and talk about that. So as we go through the smaller big buckets, from left to right on that top row, you see the O&M bucket, the transportation bucket, working cash bucket, and the HLS, which is an acronym for Health, Life, Safety. So the O&M bucket, that's operations and maintenance. Those are funds that are used for maintenance of existing facilities. Whether that's care outside for grounds and maintenance, whether it's needing new HVAC equipment, whether it's to repair bleachers that suddenly come unbolted from the wall. That hasn't happened here, but fictional scenario. Basically, that's a bucket. Those dollars can only be used for those operation and maintenance funds. Transportation, that has to do with busing and transportation. So whether it's fuel, whether it's the purchase or lease of buses, whether it's the payment of those salaries related to transportation expenses. So the salaries for bus drivers, transportation managers, etc. And then you have health, life, safety. So in the state of Illinois, there is a law that is passed that says once every 10 years, every school has to go through a health, life, safety audit. And what this essentially does is it makes sure that your school facilities continue to be in good repair, that they are suitable for housing kids, staff, and teachers in a safe way. You don't have ceilings falling down, you don't have mold issues, et cetera, et cetera. And schools are mandated to go through that audit, which is completed by a certified architect that the school would engage with. They then have to file reports on anything that has been found that needs repair with the Regional Board of Education, and then the district has a certain amount of time to address any of those issues, whether they're code violations or whether they're true health, life, safety issues. But that's what that bucket is. In the middle row, you see debt, Fund 50, which is IMRF and SS. So that's, what's the I? Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, and then Social Security. So basically, IMRF is kind of like Social Security payments, essentially, but for those state employees who pay into the IMRF system. And then you also have tort, so that's any legal expenses. So again, debt, that's money that is going against any existing bonds that you've taken out or any existing loans you've taken out. That's essentially your monthly payment on your house, right? That comes out of that fund. Your IMRF is, as an employer, that's kind of our payroll tax going into, it would be similar to like the FICA on your payroll tax that you see with your wages if you're not under an IMRF. And then tort would be any kind of legal defense that you have, any legal counsel. It could involve any payments or settlements or awards that a jury might make if you had to go through any kind of a lawsuit sort of environment. And then the final thing is capital projects, which is just more than anything, I think, kind of like an administrative account that allows dollars to flow in and out. And you see that there's 0%, actually kind of going against that. It's kind of a special use case that just allows you to flow money from one account to the next. So the thing that I will mention on here is first, several of these buckets are capped, meaning the school district cannot charge more than what has been set against that bucket. So for example, in the education bucket, there is a cap of $2 for the ed fund. We're also able to levy a nickel towards lease payments. We lease the temporary buildings that are outside that those of you who did the tour saw. And then there's 2 cents, which is for special education. So combined, those three amounts go into the education fund, and that's $2.07. The district cannot charge more than $2.07 without a referendum being passed. So that is capped by state law, and it's capped by what the local taxpaying community is willing to pay towards the education fund. The last time that was increased was about 05, 06.
03 was when it was passed, and then it was
So it implemented in 04, and I think we went from roughly about $1.10 to $2 on that. That was the last significant increase in the taxable rate for Smithton School about 13 years ago, 12, 13, depending on how you count that. The other buckets that are limited by state law are those on the top row right there, and you see this on the handouts at your table. So the district is limited to no more than a quarter, no more than 12 cents, no more than 5 cents, and no more than 5 cents for each of those 4 buckets. Now what gets interesting here, and you see some of this play out in the comparisons, the middle row buckets, there is no cap on that. So that is on an as-needed basis. So for example, if the school district had to take out a working cash bond for $3 million just to be able to meet payroll expenses in the current year, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later tonight when Bob gets up here. That would be $3 million of debt that you have, that you've got a monthly payment against that. The district has no cap set on that, and if the district needed to take out a $3 million bond, then that debt payment on there would increase your taxes by what that debt payment amount was. Similar to tort reform. Let's say, in a really horrific example, the district was sued for some reason, and a jury in St. Clair County said that the district had to pay $15 million to whoever the aggrieved party was. Then whatever that prorated amount would be for the district's tax base, that tort bucket could go up to whatever was needed to be able to cover that legal settlement. So those 3 buckets are not bound by any cap established by law, and increases are not subject to taxpayer referendum increases. Am I accurate so far? Okay, good. So that's where we're at. So if you look at your tax bill this year, you'll notice that the tax rate is 3.25 something percent. If you add up that 207, the quarter, the 12, the 5, the 5, the 18, 22, and 30 cents, that's how your single line item bill, when your taxes come out each year, gets calculated. So this is the breakdown. And then the last numbers on here, you see that the education fund, so that 76% number, that's essentially what that $2.07 is of the overall $3.25 tax rate. So 76% of the amount that you'll be paying to Smithton School next year goes into the education fund. 6% of that goes into operations and maintenance, 4% into transportation, 1% into working cash, 4% into debt payments and IMRF and Social Security, and 5% for tort. Okay. Are we done questions as we go over at the end? Okay. All right. Okay, so this is then a chart that will show you what that breakdown is compared to a representative set of schools in St. Clair County. For those of you who have been at these sessions the last few months, these are the same schools we've been tracking for everything related to finance, everything related to student class size, everything related to any other comparison where we're trying to make against other representative schools. So we've continued that same list forward. And again, what you can see here, and I think, we didn't quite catch, but Smithton School, the bulk of, again, what we're spending against is the ed fund. Here it shows 74%. I think we previously had some different numbers on the previous slide, but this represents next year, fiscal year 15. 74% of those dollars are going towards the ed fund.
It's not a difference. It's a difference in looking at the budget from one year and the
okay.
annual statement.
So this right here is very recent and updating fiscal year 16. So this is for the next year's tax bill that just came out. This chart is looking at current year expenses. So as we look at current year expenses, 74% of the district's total expenses are in that education fund. And then you can see it just plays out with 7% operations and maintenance, 4% debt, et cetera, et cetera. To me, the important thing to look at on this chart that I think really speaks to the financial stewardship that the district has is that on a percentage basis, we have an extremely, extremely low percentage of dollars going towards debt and very low percentages going to some of those other buckets that could actually be increased if need be, things like tort, et cetera. So, it's good to see such a large percentage of that being directed at the ed fund, where that direct education is actually happening. Okay, so because this is the largest bucket, we wanted to give a glimpse into what the breakdown of that is. And as you can see, 90% of that overall spending goes towards salaries and benefits. And that's everyone from paraprofessionals and lunchroom staff all the way to the administration with the principal and the superintendent. Everyone's salaries and benefits are covered under that bucket, with a few very rare exceptions that we can talk about in a bit. So what you also see then is the other 10% is made up with purchase services, kind of a miscellaneous, and then school supplies. I think the key takeaway for me on this slide is that the significant amount of the spending is going towards curriculum and teacher staff, and staff supporting the educational environment here. It's not going to a lot of contracted services. You don't see things out of whack in your miscellaneous, in your other spending there. The big number in the middle there, FY 2016 deficit. So we are projecting this year, for the school year that's going to end, in the next couple of weeks, but the fiscal year that will end in June, we're projecting a $256,000 deficit in the education fund. I'd like to say that we're alone in that company, but if you look at any reporting that goes on at the state level, 70% of the school districts in the state of Illinois are currently in the deficit spend, and most of that is driven by the education fund. And we are right along with that group of 70%, but I'm going to show you some slides on here to talk to you about the relative strength of our financial condition, even though there are some very real-world early warning challenges that we face right here. So that's where we're currently at. The primary driver of that deficit is a lot of what you've seen around state shortfalls in funding. By far the largest driver of that $256,000, is the reduced payment that the states are making to school districts. So this then takes that education fund, which again is the bulk of the spending in the district, and this projects out into the next 3 years. So this first series is making an assumption. So this GSA proration that you see under the assumptions in the upper right-hand corner, GSA stands for General State Aid, and that is essentially the amount that the state contributes towards local school revenues. For the last couple of years, the state has not paid at 100% of what they define the GSA is needed in terms of providing a quality education for students. So the state has been behind for at least 6 or 7 years, and maybe even more. In fact, in 1 year recently, it got down to 89% with a suggestion that it may go to 85 or 80. Recent rumblings out of Springfield would indicate that they're going to get back to the 92% level for the foreseeable future, but I'll believe that when I see it. But this is, if you make the assumption that from a state contribution towards our total revenue standpoint, what you would see is kind of a whittling down of our ending balance in our education fund over the next several years. So from 16 to 17, you see that deficit spend increases to roughly about $400,000 a year, all the way into 2019, where you're basically working off of a surplus that we have. I missed that a little bit earlier. If you look at the fund reserve at the end of fiscal year 16, we will have about $1.8 million allocated towards the ed fund, That's essentially a cushion that we have that has been built up over time in that ed fund that allows us to withstand the current issues of this deficit spending. This chart right here shows you that there's only so long you can go before not only are you in deficit spend, but you're in deficit spend without kind of a rainy day fund, if you will. If you look at the state funding at 100% of your GSA, you know, that rainy day fund lasts a little bit longer. That 1.7 million in cushion that we have that can go against the ed fund, you know, kind of absorb some of those operating deficits a little bit further out. You basically get about an extra year and a half before that fund would be whittled down and your deficit spend is really starting to impact into that current year. Okay, so then you might ask a question, if the largest bucket is the education fund and the single largest contribution towards that expense is salaries and benefits, here's a breakdown of that salary and benefit. Basically what you see is about 80% of that breakdown goes towards direct student instruction. So these are the classroom teachers that your kids have, these are the paraprofessionals, this is the social worker, this is the speech pathologist. The other 20% is where you get kind of your administration and your support staff. So, you know, any playground, you know, monitors that are there, playground staff, you know, we're a one-to-one technology environment, which we talked in depth about in one of the previous community engagement sessions, right? So this covers the technology director, business director, and other administrators on there. So again, about an 80-20 split, 80-20 breakdown of that primary bucket. So when you talk about staff then, and you look at the slide before that that says that you're in a deficit spend of about $250,000 in that bucket, we just thought we'd put this number up basically to say $250,000 from that direct student support standpoint. You would have to go from about 37.5 to 31 teachers. Basically, that's how you would close that bucket. It's a way to close that bucket if you were only looking to do it through staff reduction. So we talked a little bit about where does the revenue come from. The state represents about 26% of that. Federal revenue is about 6%, so the bulk of the revenues in the district do come from local revenue sources, which is primarily driven by the property taxes that you all got in the mail this past week. This then kind of shows you what's happened with local revenue over the last, call it 10 years. Where do you see the significant ramp up in 05, 06, 07? You know, think of the significant population expansion that was happening in Smithton back in the mid-2000s. I know when I moved into town in 2003, I think the stated population was about 2,000 people. And as we got into 09, 2010, I know the last census has us at about 3,700. So that's significant, you know, not quite doubling, but about 60 or 70% expansion in the population of town. Also resulted in a lot of new neighborhoods, a lot of new homes being built. It resulted in a significant increase in that equalized assessed valuation, essentially the property tax base, and that's what fueled that local revenue. Since population has flattened out, since the housing, you know, stopped going up like that and went flat or slightly positive, you see a corresponding flattening of the local revenue coming in as well. And this basically just takes the previous chart, puts it into the numbers. The key thing here would be the tax rate right there in blue. This is the sum total of what all of those buckets were that we talked about before. So again, when you add it up to 2.07, the quarter, the 12 cents, the 30 cents, that gets us with the most recent tax levy showing up at $3.25, 3.2528. And you can see that, you know, going back to 2004, that was basically where the district was at. That tax rate essentially fell during that population boom because there was so much growth in the equalized assessed valuation of property tax base that each citizen essentially had to contribute a little bit less towards making up the district revenues. But you can see that, you know, as things flattened out, that rates started to pop back up just a bit. You can see from 02, 03, 04 right there, it was really that 03 to 04 that we talked about before, which was really the significant increase there of about 90 cents. And that was the education fund that went from $1.10 to $2. So if you look at that tax rate comparison, the other, again, comparison that we did here is we looked at other consolidated districts, which are K through 8 schools, and then added in their corresponding high school rate. So in our case, Smithton K through 8, and then Freeburg High School. And you can see in the highlighted bar there, the 3.25 for Smithton plus the 2.30 for Freeburg puts us at about $5.55. So that right there represents the total tax bill that you saw between the two schools that came out here this last week. So when you think about that bill that you have your property value, roughly a third of that is your assessed value. So whatever that 1/3 is, your assessed value, take that times 5.5573%, and that's the total amount we're paying towards the schools. 3.25% of it to Smithton and 2.3% of it to Freeburg. And again, you can compare that against some of the other area schools. You know, down here where you see Bell Valley really high, my guess is that's largely driven by the new school construction that they had out there a couple of years ago right off of Green Mountain Road. But again, that's where we fall. So another key element to look at here then is debt, right? So for me personally, I think the sign of a healthy district is one that has a pretty low debt burden in relation to its overall revenue base, unless there is something unusual going on in that district, like you're building a new school or you've taken out a referendum for construction or significant repair or update. Which again, if you look at Bell Valley at 2.03, that's got to be driven by that school that they built. But you see Smithton against the representative schools here, again, a very small amount. This is a bond that is going to be paid off in about 3 years. It's about $165,000 payment that we make each year, and it represents about 18 cents of that overall levy. So we talked quite a bit about state revenue earlier. You can see from a spike in the early 2000s, kind of the downward trend line. Again, there was kind of a bit of a resurgence there in 2013, but things are definitely on a downward trend. The big spike that you see there was tied to a school construction grant that came in back in 2003 with an addition that was made to the building. There's not a lot of school construction grant dollars out in the state right now, but that's why that spike's so high. And then federal revenue again, you can see slight increases there. This is a very different scale, but for the most part, hovering in that 5, 6, 7% of overall district revenues. So we've talked a lot about kind of local comparisons. There's another thing that the state does each year. They'll go in and look at every school district, their revenues, their expenses, their working cash, how many days of savings they have on hand in terms of expenses that they could cover if revenues went away. And they basically will assign a grade. It's a weighted grade on how well the district is doing from a financial management standpoint. And you can see the total number of districts in the state of Illinois are out to the right. And these are the 4 grades that you'll get. They assign in recognition, review, early warning, and watch. Recognition are those that are relatively strong compared to other districts across the number of different measures. And you can see the breaks there in terms of what that composite score is. So just to show you where Smithton ranks, you can see against kind of those representative schools in St. Clair County, we rate really well. We're at a 3.7. We're in the recognition category. We maintained that rating from 2015 into 2016 with the same score. And you can see some of the other districts that are around here. Freeburg 70, kind of in that same grouping. The high school falls into the next grouping. You can see where that's at. you might start to see the state get more involved is where you start to get into the early warning and then into the watch category, where they can start to institute more controls over the local district if need be. We obviously want to avoid that. So there's, it's a challenging financial environment to be sure. There are more challenges on the horizon. The state of Illinois continues to be in a state of gridlock with the new governor and with the leadership of the House and Senate that has been in place for a couple of decades, who are just fundamentally opposed on pretty much everything. And because of that, there's been 10 months now that the state has gone into its fiscal year and not a budget has been passed. So the state operates on a July to June fiscal calendar, and we're in May. So from last July of 15, the state is operating without an official budget. Nothing has been approved. Who knows what's going to happen up there? The good thing is that with that $1.7 million or so of our ending ed fund balance, we have essentially 220 days of operating cash in our education fund that can help to weather that storm. You may have seen something recently here where the state determined that, oops, we gave local school districts too much money a couple years ago and some dollars that were allocated to them, and we now need to recoup that. And we're going to recoup it through reduced payments in the future. Luckily for Smithton, there wasn't a significant overpayment. It only resulted in about $2,200. So this isn't really up there as a significant financial hurdle, but more just to give you some visibility into what our liability is with that story that had come out a couple of weeks ago in the local papers. I think there were some area districts that had nearly $1 million that they were overpaid, that they're going to see about $1 million in reduced state funds coming in over the course of the next year or so. And then certainly there are two very big overriding challenges that we have from a financial standpoint in our district, and we're going to get into some workshop activities later tonight that we want to get your input on. The first one is, without a doubt, that education fund deficit that we saw out there. To me, we're in a good situation, and we are proactively having this conversation to try to figure out what are the priorities for the community so that we can fix that deficit before we don't have some funds that can pay for that education fund. So we're trying to be proactive in that regard. But the reality is, when those funds are whittled down, we're essentially spending more money than we're taking in. And we're doing that now, but we've got to push it. It's not a good way to run an organization when you're taking in less money than what you're spending. So we need to figure out what's the right way. You can increase revenues or you can decrease expenses, or some combination of both. That's the only way to bring that back into balance, and we want your input on that tonight. And then the other thing that has come up through the first three community engagement sessions, and I would invite you, if you have not been part of that, to go out to the Facebook page, the website, and look at some of those presentations. But overall, the nearly 75 or 80 people who were at the first meeting, the 50 to 60 who were at the second meeting, and the 35 to 40 at the last meeting. It was opening day that night. So we're back-to-back opening day and game 6. But without a doubt, one of the very top challenges that has been identified and one of the priorities relates to space. For those of you who are on the tour today, you see that there really is no excess space. I got the question a couple of days ago from my neighbor because I was involved with some others in the room in the 03 referendum the 2013 referendum about the new school construction. A few years ago when there was a debate about whether or not we should build a new middle school south of town. And when the Vote No group was talking about that, one of the things that we identified was that there was at least one classroom that was still empty and not being fully utilized at the school. And so I got the question the other day, well, just 3 years ago, you said that there was still a little bit of extra space. What's different now? And I can tell you from a classroom standpoint, there was one very significant difference that utilized that very final classroom. And that is that the last classes who had 2 classes in their grade level has now moved through and graduated into the high school. Every grade level that we have at Smithton right now has 3 classes in the grade. And that's with an attempt to try to keep that average class size at or below state averages. So, our average class size, depending on the grade, is anywhere from about 18 kids up to maybe 22, 23. And so we're intentionally trying to keep that good student to pupil ratio. But that was what happened to that extra classroom right there is, that year's 8th grade only needed 2. And now this year's 8th grade needs 3 because it's that big population wave that we saw has now worked its way, through the system where we've got 3 grades for every, or 3 classes for every grade. That's all you're going to hear from me, unless you have any questions. Towards the end, we'll save those. But I'm going to introduce Mr. Tom Crabtree. He is a representative of Smithton CCSD, who is a finance company, and they have some awareness and visibility into an issue that is gaining steam throughout the county, something called the county school facility tax. And he's going to talk to you a little bit about what that is.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here tonight. We're going to go through some of the numbers.
Are you showing us a presentation?
Whichever you prefer.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, we can go through the video first. It probably makes more sense. Yeah. So what we're going to do tonight, we'll two-step on some of the technical information. We have a 9 or 10 minute video that just gives some of the background of what the actual sales tax is, what it can be used for, what it is not. So hopefully this sort of answers some of the questions in advance, and then we'll go through. So what you have here is the numbers behind the sales tax, and we're going to take you through the example for Smithton, highlighted in blue, in the middle of the page, to help you understand some of the ways that the sales tax dollars actually will impact your district directly. So what we have here is a chart showing all of the revenue for the sales tax that's generated within St. Clair County. It is then dispersed amongst each one of the districts. Each line you see here are the districts that participate in the sales tax generated in St. Clair County. Column 3 is the enrollment for each district. The reason that we start with enrollment is because that is the way that the districts receive their share of funds. The revenue is distributed on a per pupil basis, but it's not just per pupil, it's per in-county resident pupil. So you have to think of all the children that live in St. Clair County that go to a public school, and each one of those children receive a dollar figure on their head. So where that student goes to school, that is the school district that receives their portion of the funds. And the reason there's a difference between column 3 and column 4 is that we do actually have some instances where there are either students who live outside of St. Clair County and come to school in St. Clair County, or a district that's headquartered in St. Clair County. And we also have the opposite. We have students who live in St. Clair County, but actually participate in the school district headquartered outside of St. Clair County. There's only a couple of those. It's the last 5 districts highlighted in red. So there are actually a little bit of funds that flow from St. Clair County to the district headquartered outside of the county. So it's really column 4 that we divide into the total revenue. The total revenue that you'll see is the $22,187,000. If you divide the number of students that are in the population of the in-county students, the 41,580 at the bottom of column 4, each student receives the equivalent of $534. That's what you'll see on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. So simply by multiplying that 534 by the number of qualifying students, we get column 6. Column 6 is the estimate of the annual revenue that a school district would receive. So for Smithton, that equates to $276,000. What we've tried to do throughout the rest of this table is illustrate two extremes. Those two extremes would be the idea that you could, and you'll see some more about this in the video before I do explain it in a few minutes. There are generally two extremes that you can use the revenue for. Either to one extreme, using all of those funds toward a bond issue, or the opposite side of that, using all of the funds to abate or pay existing bond debt service. So column 7 is the one extreme that shows what would be the maximum project size at this time. Generally speaking, it's a very rough figure because there's a lot of variables. But generally speaking, what size project would $276,000 per year support on a 20-year bond issue? And that's $3 million, roughly speaking, in that example. The other side of that equation is to say, well, we know the district receives $276,000 per year. Right now, in fiscal year 16, the district paid $162,000 in debt service. So the other side of that equation could be, if you were to use $162,000 of the $276,000 that you received, you could abate all or reduce all of your bond interest payment, which equates to 18 cents on your overall levy, which then equates in the last column to virtually $60 of property taxes per $100,000 market home value. Generally, it would be twice that much for a $200,000 home, and it would be half that much for a $50,000 home. But again, the point of this entire table is to show you A, the way that the funds are distributed, B, the general amount of revenue that would be received, and some extremes of how you could use those funds. So we'll try the video again, and if not, I will just keep talking.
little bit about funding. Why does a school need to issue debt? Construction. You build new facilities, just like building a house. It's longer-term debt. That's a legitimate reason to issue debt. Improvements to existing facilities, more like home improvement loan. Cash flow needs. So you have a cash shortfall, you borrow temporarily, pay it off quickly. So in construction, generally speaking, debt should always be paid off quicker than the useful life of the asset. For facilities, that's 10 to 20 years. These are all subject to the district legal debt limit. 6.9% of that EAV number is the legal debt limit. Similar to a mortgage on your home. Requires voter approval. So the district can't do anything without the voter approval. Facility improvements should pay off over a shorter period of time. This is not a brand new, it's improvements, just like a home improvement loan. 3 to 10 years, subject to the district legal debt limit, similar to a car loan or home improvement loan. Health and safety improvements are approved by regional state superintendents. Brian talked about that earlier. They do not require voter approval. All other increases to the bond interest levy do require voter approval. So cash flow needs. You're expecting that money from the state, they don't pay you. You don't have a rainy day fund that Brian referred to. Districts need to borrow cash. But it should be paid off in a short period of time. It's like using your credit card at home. Typically 1 to 3 years, subject to district legal debt limit, similar to a credit card. Don't put something on a credit card you can't pay off pretty quickly. You're going to pay a lot of money for that. Can be approved without voter approval, subject to a petition period. So why can't my school maintain a balanced budget? Schools levy in December, so they tell the county how much money they want to levy in December. And that's for the July 1 through June 30 following year. The county doesn't provide the EAV number, so you're guessing. It's always a guessing game. So you levy, and then they tell you what the EAV is, so you're multiplying one by the other. The state doesn't come into a funding problem. This year, I guess they appropriated the money.
Just for the education.
Just for the education line item. So that's the other wild card here is you just don't know how to depend on it. The district doesn't know exactly how many students will be in which grade level at the start of the school year, as Brian mentioned, three classes in every grade. Well, if you had 10 or 15 students drop, you've already pre-committed to fund the teachers for that 60 days prior to the end of the school year. Or you have to notice them in a reduction in force before the end of this current school year. So 60 days prior to usually in March. That's for the school year that started in August of this year. Funding sources. Every time we borrow money, it costs money. I'm on the side where Tom advises and puts out things to bid, and I bid on it through the bank that I work at. There's legal costs, there's underwriting costs, all of it adds to your cost. So again, for construction of new facilities or improvements, in my opinion, debt instruments are appropriate. For either of these first two scenarios, the sales tax strategy may prove to be a good solution. For cash flow needs, debt instruments, in my opinion, may or may not be appropriate. If the need is temporary, then I feel it is appropriate. If the need is ongoing, then I feel the district needs to look at increasing revenue or reducing expenses. It's no different than your budget at home. You know how much money you make over time. You got to balance those things out. moving in a small group work activity. So in each table, if you'll select a reporter and a facilitator. Do we have time? All right, we're going to have a Q&A. Yes, Mr. Miller.
It would just be a quarter of what's shown of the, I think, 267,000, so it'd be a quarter of that. So 60,000, correct, number 1%. Correct. The numbers were 1%.
1% sales tax as compared to property tax, or a quarter of sales tax.
This is all sales tax.
Let me just kind of fill in some gaps here that you might have. With regard to the sales tax initiative, that has been an issue that's been placed on the ballot in a number of surrounding counties, like you saw on the map, that Andover was speaking about. And so there has been talk in St. Clair County over the last 18 months about proposing that sales tax here in St. Clair County. And so much of what was detailed in Ann's presentation and what Tom talked about was looking at the specifics of what stream of revenue that would bring in to our district and the ability to do what you could use that money for and how you can't use the money. So one of the issues that we've been dealing with over the past 3.5 months is the whole issue of facility challenges. And so the sales tax revenue, if that were to pass in St. Clair County, would be one potential source of revenue that could provide funds to enhance the facilities, expand the facilities without necessarily costing property tax owners. So instead of raising the property taxes, the sales tax revenue, in Smithton's case, I think it was around $276,000 a year. So, and that was just slightly under a $3 million bond that could be loaded and supported with that revenue. So there wouldn't be any additional cost to you as a taxpayer. So there are meetings like this going on throughout the county. O'Fallon has had a number of meetings about the sales tax initiative. The Delaware districts and the feeder districts are in the process of starting to talk about this as well. Because as Tom mentioned, you have to have districts representing 50% of the student population in the county pass a resolution to place it on the ballot. And so what our district wanted to do, or what our board wanted to do, was to educate you about what it is, and then get some feedback about whether or not you think that that should be something that the board should see placed on the ballot for voters to decide. Keeping in mind that the sales tax initiative, we don't raise a lot of sales tax here in Smithton. So much of that sales tax will be generated in Fairview Heights, for example, and O'Fallon, where you have a lot of businesses. But as Mr. Craig mentioned, our students benefit with the same dollar value as the students in O'Fallon and Belleville. It comes down to a certain dollar amount per child. So for us, we would definitely see revenue coming in more so than what we would be able to produce on our own here in Smithton from a sales tax, just literally for the village. And so part of this evening's presentation was to educate you about what that is, because A, it has the potential of providing new revenue source for us that doesn't impact you as a homeowner here. But B, you're going to hear about it in the county. You're going to most likely hear about it in the paper. There have been already a couple of articles written in the Belleville Democrat about it. And so we wanted to make sure that people in our community were educated about what it is and really what it's about. So I think as, Bob was kind of pointing out in his mind, really right away, I just figured you probably don't want to talk again tonight, so I picked Brian to kind of read the the financial information, because sometimes it sounds different with the different voices through a different filter. But, you know, the two biggest challenges that we certainly face are A, the education deficit, the other deficit, and the facility challenges, and how do we fix those, how do we fund benefits for those if that's something we decide we need to do. So this, and one other just quick comment before we go to the Q&A. On your table, there are a number of reference documents. Number one, there's a full printout of tonight's PowerPoint, because we knew that you're probably going to want to see that really small spreadsheet where you could at least maybe read the numbers in terms of what it means to Smithton and some of the other districts in the county. And then secondly, there's well, that actually is in the handout from Sequel, so that has some of those slides that you saw in the video that are in there. And then there's a third reference document we're not going to get into, but there's one that has a lot of information more about different types of bonds. And that's beyond what our conversation is here tonight. But for those of you that are interested in that, you certainly need to take a look at that and use those as reference documents as you do that work activity. So with that, I hope that gives you a little bit better grounding about what the conversation about the sales tax is. And I'd be happy to turn it over to any of these three gentlemen. Ken, I think you asked about what a quarter increase in property taxes might. Okay, gotcha. Right. I think.
So this sales tax is relatively a permanent sales tax, meaning that you vote at the time the school districts, the boards representing school districts would ask for a specific amount to be put on the ballot.
to have a feel for whether or not it appears as though there's going to be enough support to place it on the ballot. So from a preliminary standpoint, from the meetings I attended, it appears that there will be minimal support for it to be placed on the ballot. But again, the conversations that are taking place, just like this one, superintendents are attempting to be sensitive to their communities. Boards, it's not just, certainly not even me, as a board of education, being sensitive to their communities to say whether or not this is something that will be supported. No, we have to be careful. There's laws that protect or limit what we as a school district can say in terms of asking people to support or not support something like this. But our goal is to simply educate you about the fact that it could be a potential revenue source unrelated to property taxes. And Pam, to get back to your question with regard to how do you educate people in the community about it. That's what these sort of homegrown community meetings are all about, to try to grow some understanding. And I believe there will be some independent folks, not related to a school district, board of education, for example, but perhaps community members that help to promote that. We are able to promote any type of actual education about that to the community. But I can't go out, the board of education can't go out, folks that work here can't go out and say, vote yes or vote no. That's not legal for us to do. But it is okay for us to just educate people about it. So.
So on this election timeline sheet, it appears to me that no matter when, if, assuming this is approved, in November or next April, we still wouldn't be passed until October 17th. But when I look at the April one, there's less than 30 days for them to finalize and certify the result of the election to get the proposal to the Department of Revenue. So, how does that work? If we approve it, but for some reason the election results are not pending for some reason that they have for this cycle, does that mean that we have to wait a whole other year, or that has to be voted on again?
Well, I don't believe that long, but the short answer is there is a legal guideline. The county clerk must certify the vote within X many days. And that timeline is sufficient, I believe, for the election. Depending on the date in April, it's close, but there is time. So legally, we obligated to provide that time to provide the department with what they want.
So we're going to move quickly into our work activity on the spring sheet. When someone asks, is that facility